Well, hi there. Welcome to this webcast. Jonathan Foust here. We're going to have a short meditation followed by a talk. And in the talk, we're going to explore that space between sensation and all the stories your mind makes up and how to find a little bit of freedom in there. Before we do, quick thank yous. First of all, to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for streaming this, to our producer, Glenn Harrison, as well, our mindful movement leader, Rita Moran. If you'd like to join her, 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, you can find that link on my website and on my Facebook page. And that'll bring you right up to here at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time for this. So anyway, good to have you here. I've got a newsletter weekly that lets you know what's coming up, and I've got one coming out in the next little while. Every a couple times a year, I send out a newsletter with kind of an overview, compendium of talks, stuff that's coming up, and most critically for me, I share my best photography. I shoot almost every day, and it's been spectacular this fall, I have to say. Being on the river at sunrise or before sunrise, got some good images to share. So that's there. Also, finally, before we begin, this is all offered freely. There's no paywall. There's nothing. I've received a lot through this tradition of generosity, and it's my honor to pass it on. And if you feel any surge of generosity in return, feel free. Thank you. I appreciate it. There's costs that go into this, and a fair bit of time goes into these offerings, but it comes from a place of incredible gratitude. Oh, finally, another finally. December 7th, I'm offering a day-long retreat with Tara on how to keep your heart open in perilous times. That's going to be online as well as in person at Catholic University. Check out my website or Tara's website for that. And I'm going to be offering the annual Most Important Thing retreat in January, which is a whole day of reflecting on, guess what? The most important thing. So that's there as well. So with that, let's move into a little meditation. And to do so, you might like to close your eyes if you're in a position where you can do so. This will be about a roughly 12 minutes of gathering attention and settling. So feel free to take a little bit of time, stretch your body in any way that feels good. How does your body want to move? Or you got to get any little wiggles out. And you might very gently lengthen through the back of the neck. As you do so, feel this subtle lengthening. And if you like, you can close your eyes and bring your attention to this sense of the inner world. Noticing where you feel the breath the most predominant. Notice the quality of feeling right now. You might take a moment to sense this whole, what we could call the intrinsic world, everything inside. Warmth, tingling, pulse, sensing what's moving. And acknowledging the extrinsic world, the sounds around you right now. The sense of the air touching your skin. The pressure points between your body and the chair or cushion or sofa or pillow. And can you sense in your own way, with all these sensations, both inside and outside, what is it that's aware right now? This incredible practice of noticing what is aware. Let's take some time to explore what it's like to soften and relax even more into the present moment through this inner world of sensation and softening. Sensing from the inside out, the forehead. Can you feel your forehead smooth? Could you relax and soften all the little muscles around your eyes? And you might scan from the inside your face, the muscles of your face. What could soften? Could you relax your tongue? Let your tongue fill your lower jaw. Could you relax the lips? Could you let your jaw soften? You might sense through the shoulders. And as you bring your awareness down the length of the arms, can you feel or imagine the weight, the heaviness, the length of your arms, all the way down through the elbows, all the way down through the wrists, and awareness now flooding into the palms, filling the thumbs and the fingers, the backs of the hands. What do you feel? What do you notice here? Can you feel or imagine the space inside your throat? Can you feel or imagine the space inside your lungs? Just notice how your body breathes all by itself. Can you sense the rib cage and the diaphragm? The movement here with the breath, the diaphragm lifting and expanding on the in breath, falling, moving inward on the out breath. Can you feel now the space around the belly, between the navel and the spine? And for the next three breaths, how intimately can you feel the breath? Sensing now down deep in the abdomen, the bowl of the pelvis, the space between the left hip and the right hip. And sensing now down the length of the legs, from the hips to the knees. The knees down through the ankles. And sensing now the tops of the feet and the toes. The soles of the feet and the heels. Feeling the volume or the space inside the feet and toes. And as you open your awareness to this interior world, from the crown of the head down to the soles of the feet, what could relax? And what could relax or soften even more? And as you relax and soften, what do you feel? Any sense of pulse or tingling or vibration or subtle energy, subtle movement on the inside? And you might now bring your attention to again where you feel the breath the most predominant right now. And bring your attention to the sound vibrations that are happening right now. For the next few minutes, you might explore, if it feels right for you, what it's like to rest your attention here at the breath or the awareness of sound vibration, letting this be a focal point, kind of an entry point to come back to the here and now when you notice the mind has moved into the narrative, into story. When you notice the mind lost in a thought form, take your time on the return. Sense through the whole body what could relax or soften right now. Bring your attention again to your focal point of breath or sound, and you might explore what it's like to relax right at the point of breath, right at this perception of sound vibration, and to rest your attention here yet again. What is happening right now? Can you name it in a word or two? Can you let it be? In these remaining minutes, you might explore what it's like to widen your awareness. With the awareness of breath or sound in the foreground, relaxing and opening your attention to this perception of everything that's changing. Sensing Again, this quality of the witness and that which is aware, sensing what it's like to notice what's happening as it's happening and to allow your experience to flow. You might explore now in this remaining minute what it's like to simply let everything be just as it is. You might relax the focal point of breath or sound. Notice the natural flow of phenomena. Explore what it's like to feel the stillness in the midst of change. Open, relaxed, and aware. And what is happening right now? And is it possible to let this be just as it is? Nothing to add, nothing to take away. As you're ready, you might gently deepen your breath, feel the space around you. Notice the quality of presence, anything that may have shifted in the last 15 minutes. And as you're ready, let your body move and stretch and take this time for your transition. There's no hurry, no rush. Welcome back. I'm pretty sure you've seen YouTube videos of people doing really stupid things, like texting and falling into a water fountain, walking into a doorway that someone's booby trapped with saran wrap, going down a water slide and in midair, their bathing suit falling off. So there's a lot of that stuff out there. It can be highly entertaining, but what interests me, maybe more than whatever embarrassment they're experiencing, is how they react. Some people get really embarrassed and your heart breaks for them. Some people get really angry and they start cursing at everyone around them, or they just instinctively start lashing out. And some people start laughing hysterically. What determines your response is not the event, but what happens between the experience and your story of what you make up about it. I'd like to talk about that space, the space between what happens, the event, and the story you make up about it. Because in that space, that's where infinite possibility lives. That's where liberation lives. There's a skill you can develop of noticing that space and using it to untangle your whole life experience, untangle your beliefs, and untangle your conditioning. This talk is called The Space Between Sensation and Story. It's kind of recognizing, decoding, and liberating the roots of stress and suffering. Viktor Frankl famously said that between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. That's where the freedom lies. So I'd like to explore with you four elements. The first is that sensation is not your story. Sensation is just information. I'd like to talk as well about how your mind creates a narrative to explain all of your discomfort. Not necessarily reliable. Third, I'd like to talk about how beliefs are formed from unexamined stories. If you look closely at those stories, quite often they're not based on fact. And finally, how freedom emerges in that space. How does it actually happen? So, a little bit about how sensation is information, not your story. I was exploring with someone who was describing an upcoming vacation with their family. They had a lot of family history, as does everyone. But what they were noticing when I invited them to shift from the story to how that story kind of lived on the inside, they were describing an elevated pulse. They were describing a kind of a tightness that they were feeling on the inside. And he said, ugh, I'm anxious again. But we stayed with it. And with curiosity and kind of clarification, he recognized there was more to it than that. He realized that the anxiety also had some excitement, that there was something in that felt sense of tightness, of tension, of kind of elevated pulse that actually had to do with a little tinge of excitement looking forward. And that shifted her whole story, or his whole story, I'm sorry. The Buddha described Vedana. This is the feeling tone of the body. It shows up as neutral or pleasant or unpleasant. And Vedana, this feeling tone, is not personal. It's just information. And we make up stories all the time. I heard an actor tell me how when he was starting off as an actor, he had one line in his first play. And he had horrible anxiety, just this really, really deep tension inside and couldn't really shake it. And he just kept saying to it, don't blow your line, don't blow your line, don't blow your line. And in the first time they were offering the play, his time came and he could feel the clench inside. And then he spoke and he said, don't blow your line. We misinterpret bodily sensations all the time. We're run by those sensations unless we can open up that gap between stimulus and response. Sensations are neutral signals. They transform into stress and they transform into suffering when our identification kicks in. So when we're trained in being mindful of the body, kind of mindful of sensation, we start to train ourselves to feel without flinching. Classic example, a little while ago, I went in for my COVID shot. Now, the last time I got my COVID shot, it was not an enjoyable experience. I mean, the shot was okay, but it set me into like a 3-day slump. And I found myself, as I was anticipating the shot, doing the chit chat with the tech, and then getting the shot. As I was getting the shot, I was just visualizing 3 days of terrible recovery. Now, thankfully, I noticed that. And I was able to come back to the moment of getting the shot. And I was able to just say to myself, right now, I'm fine. No, I didn't feel great for the day after, but I might have felt worse if I had just continued to stream attention toward that horrific outcome. The thing is, though, that the sensation I was feeling with the COVID shot, it was not personal. It was just happening. I was manufacturing an entire story around horrible outcomes. So the more skilled we become in decoding sensation, seeing it simply as information, the less we are going to be seduced by the stories. And so it becomes a very interesting thing to pause open up that gap a little bit and then ask, is this anger or is this disappointment? Is this chronic depression or is this just a sense of sadness? But here's the thing, when sensation arises, the mind cannot help itself. The mind is a storytelling prediction machine, and it begins to just explain things and keep your negative, keep your negative bias going mostly. So being aware of the story and whether this manufactured story from the mind is true or not becomes an important factor in freeing yourself from stress and suffering. If someone doesn't text you back, chances are you might move into some story of like, oh, she must be mad at me, or what have I done wrong? And you may find that the story is just simply manufactured possible predictions from the mind, but not necessarily true. I understand that in medical school, there's something classically called sophomore's disease. And in that part of your medical training, you're reading about all the symptoms of all the diseases, and you become convinced that you have all of them. The Buddha said that wherever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that becomes the inclination of the mind. Whatever you think and ponder upon, that becomes the inclination of the mind. And I was thinking about this, and I remembered doing a 10-day retreat, a very classical retreat, and we were doing daily, once a day, we were doing what's called the Aditan meditation, which is called the sitting of strong determination. Very powerful focused meditation where you sit with the intention not to move an unnecessary muscle. So, of course, the breathing happens, but rather than shifting or just mindlessly moving, you are letting your body be like a mountain. It can be powerful and it can be excruciating. But at one point, I was sitting cross-legged and my knee started cramping up. I was determined to be a good meditator. I didn't move, and I watched the sensation get worse and then worse. And I watched my mind manufacture the most amazing scenarios where I was convinced that I would never walk again. And the interesting thing was over that long sit, that chronic pain in my knee that felt permanent and permanently crippling, it shifted and I was fine. But I came out of that experience with this recognition that my mind is just such a drama queen. It just picks up on incomplete information and manufactures stories. Mark Twain famously said that the worst things in my life never actually happened. And it's a really interesting thing. Like, how much of your anxiety is based on reality? And you might find that there are certain stories that you tell yourself repeatedly that amplify this sense of anxiety or dis-ease. See, the mind is constantly narrating. And this, of course, becomes really evident when you pay attention to the mind. That is an ongoing narrative on what's happening, commentary on what's happening. And then the mind is kind of designed to anticipate challenges. It's preserving yourself. So, in essence, you're walking down the street. There's an element of your mind that is simply saying, don't die, don't die, don't die. It's scanning for stuff that can kill you. Our stories arise out of habitual patterns, not necessarily present moment truths. When we move into catastrophizing, we forget that right now we're okay. A story I've told before, but it's one that's pertinent to me. I was canoeing with my family in the Boundary Waters canoe area when I think I was 13. So I was like probably 6'5" and 145 pounds. And it had been raining for about 5 solid days when we were canoeing and sleeping in canvas tents with, you know, old style sleeping bags, and everything was soaked, just soaked. And we were trying to start fires with cold wood. And um, I remember saying to my father, and also I remember standing there just like this super skinny 13-year-old, and I was wearing jeans. And you know what it's like when your jeans are cold and it's windy and they're wet. And I would shift my body a little bit, and a whole new section of cold, wet jean material would freeze me even more. And I said to my dad, if I had an anvil, I would tie it around my neck and I'd throw it in that lake. And I got this look from my dad I'd never seen before. My dad had been in World War II, missing in action twice wounded, and twice received awards for days of sustained combat without reinforcement. He gave me this really, really cold look, and he said, "No one's shooting at us." That just so shut me down. And I remember from time to time that phrase. As much as my mind is creating some cathartic narrative, look around, no one's shooting at us. So, seeing this gap between the felt experience and your interpretation is really important. And if we don't, the consequences are pretty horrible. You're caught in constant reaction. You'll be caught in constantly putting out fires. There'll be no peace whatsoever. So, if sensation is the spark, story is the fire. And if you investigate the fire, you have to trace the heat back to the source. And underneath our repeated stories are beliefs. And our beliefs are quite often, they're fixed, they're calcified, and usually they're unconscious. There's a great phrase that says, don't believe what you think. The Buddha talked about ditthi. And ditthi refers to views that obscure reality and perpetuate suffering. And when you begin to deconstruct your beliefs, when you begin to deconstruct the construct of how you've narrated your life, this becomes more and more clear that you hold certain views that just perpetuate stress and perpetuate suffering and actually make it impossible to see what's real. I was in a conversation with a guy who had a story around constant neglect in his life. As a child, he felt really neglected. It wasn't the challenging thing, and I find this for so many people, by the way, is there's something around like malevolent neglect, and there's something around benign neglect. I think a lot of people, when they look back, they realize that they're kind of a product of benign neglect. Primary caretakers, were provided, were well intended, but there was some essential neglect that wasn't there for them. And so he was sort of telling the story of how thinking that because of this neglect, he was just kind of unworthy of love. And I paused and I said, is that true? Did you actually know that that's true? At first, he was pretty emphatic. Well, yeah, that's been just the way my life works. I said, well, let me just ask you, do you feel do you feel neglect in your life right now? And we started going through his relationships, and The first most important relationship for most people, if they are honest, is their pet. He was like, no, my dog loves me. I said, well, what about your wife? He goes, we've been through a lot, but I know that she is really there for me. I said, are your parents still alive? He goes, yeah, they're still around. And I've actually gone through a lot of healing with them. Speaking of dogs barking. So we've gone through a lot. I really kind of see their point of view, and I appreciate how hard they've worked to make a life for me. So, well, that's interesting. So, do you have friends? He goes, I do. I have a lot of friends. I said, so here's this thought that you're kind of unworthy of love because of this neglect. Who are you without that thought? It was so interesting to watch his face because something very old and kind of painful sort of like flickered up on his face. And then it kind of softened. It's such a powerful inquiry when you can identify a core belief and really, really look at it. There's a technology that Byron Katie has developed, which is beautiful stuff. Particularly, it's powerful, I find, when you tie it into somatic inquiry, where you're really aware of how those beliefs actually live in your nervous system. Can be quite profound. Just another story in a conversation with someone a number of years ago of a woman who'd been divorced for just a couple of years. And her life was really about family and raising kids. And suddenly the relationship was over. Her kids had moved on. And she found herself really wanting a relationship, like open to intimacy again. A whole new phase of life that was pretty scary from this focus on raising kids to time and space in her life. And she shared about the horrors of putting herself out there. And I think for everyone who explores that whole world of online dating, it's what a oof. I'm so sorry. Deep discouragement. She has such deep discouragement. And we kind of elected to do a little inquiry into that sense of discouragement. And first, we explored it somatically, and there's a sense of like just a crushing sense of heaviness, of sadness, of just feeling stuck. And then I asked her, well, what's the core belief here? What are you believing? And she said, there's no one out there for me. It's interesting when you begin to identify beliefs to really, really hone in. And I asked her, I said, well, is that true? Is that the core belief? She said, no, it's deeper than that. It's like there's something wrong with me. So we went with that. And I asked, is that true? Is it true that there's really deeply something wrong with you? She said, well, it sure looks that way. And I said, well, is it really true? Do you know absolutely that that's true? She said, well, maybe not. It's all we need is that crack in the wall. So I asked her to explore, well, when you it may not be true, but sometimes you think it's true. And when you believe it's true, what's that like inside? And we began to explore this whole world of how when that belief is operative, when that software is running the show that there's something wrong with me, how does that live on the inside? And when you explore a belief like that, it's very, very challenging. It's so tied into old conditioning. And when you can keep cutting below the story and kind of ride where you feel that. And for her, it was just this sense of a deep sense of tightness, a deep sense of wanting attention and affection and love and not getting it. When she really got in touch with that, then I asked the question. So here's this thought, this belief that there's something inherently wrong with you. Intellectually, you know it's not true. But when you think that thought, then what arises inside is this sense of feeling tight, feeling small, of wanting, really just that sense of like deep hunger. So who are you without that thought? And again, we can't rush this process. And because she was so in contact with how it lived on the inside, it felt like something really deep shifted for her. When you can feel the release of an old belief, you're opening again to the sense of unconditioned awareness, which can be quite freeing. And Byron Katie another process to kind of lock that in because we so quickly go back to our comfort zone of safety. And so I asked her, well, can you give me three examples of being worthy of love? And she said, well, I haven't been perfect, but I am totally there for my kids. So we reflected on that, what that felt like. And she thought of her dog, who was a great companion. And then a longer, deeper pause. And just said, I'm a good person. I care. When you take the time to identify the stories that run your life and the beliefs that arise out of unexamined stories, all kinds of possibilities lie in here. Quite often, the core beliefs are tied into not being good enough, to not being worthy of attention, affection, and love. And the steps are to take some time to identify that core belief. And when you have a sense of it, it takes some digging, and we will not dive into it here, but I'd like to share the process with you a little bit. If you take a belief, say, like, there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good enough, you ask yourself, do you know that to be true? For many people, first blush is like, yeah, that's true. But then stay with it. Do you absolutely know that's true? And all you need is a little crack in the wall. And then to take some time, only when the conditions are right, to then explore, what does it feel like inside when you think that thought? How does that thought live in your nervous system? And you may find if you give it space, if you listen deeply, if you allow a felt sense to form, there's a lifelong relationship with that thought. You might even be able to trace it back to the early conditions that kind of fostered that belief system. It may kick off memories of where that thought kicked in and held you back from being fully expressed or fully receiving. And only when you have a sense of what it's like to live with that thought, of how old that is, of how old that software has been installed in your operating system, you can ask the question, who am I without that thought? And then listen. It may be just a glimpse, but that glimpse is huge. Who are you without that thought? And you might even take some time to look for some examples of how it's not true. It's kind of the magic of the magic of threes. Come up with three examples of any time in your life when that wasn't true. The Talmud says, we do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. We interpret life through this lens of our beliefs. And when I was a kid, I don't know how old I was, maybe 7 or 8, I heard my mother say to someone on the telephone, our family doesn't test well in math. It's so weird. From that day on, I stopped trying when it came to math. It was like, why bother? Even puzzles. I'll let someone else figure out how that works. I'm not good at that. I'll find something else to focus on that I'm good at. So interesting how I just sucked up that belief and incorporated it. Now, I actually think there is some truth to the fact that I don't test well in math, but nonetheless, I do feel limited by that. So the beliefs are frozen stories. They're ideas and thoughts that are repeated so many times that you assume that they're true. And the interesting thing is that the beliefs live in the mind, but they are absolutely felt in the body. And they are often felt as a contraction or pressure. When you take the time to slow down and to explore how those limiting beliefs live on the inside, not to argue with the belief, but just simply sense, where do I feel this? How old is this? Is it true? The interesting thing here is that releasing a belief does not require any force. It only requires clear seeing. And when limiting beliefs soften, reality starts to flow again. So then, where is freedom? It's in the pause. That pause between stimulus and response. When you pause and you feel, you have the option of responding rather than reacting. In the heat of an argument, one breath can make all the difference. The key is breaking the chain of reactivity. Someone said, my dog growled at me. I was so annoyed, I almost growled back. And then I remembered I had a choice. So it's interesting to reflect on a time when you are successful at pausing, a time when you had the capacity just to take a breath or two and to realize how you were utterly trapped, and then a moment of spaciousness or a moment of freedom arose. I haven't had many, but I have had some that have been very, very powerful. I've told this story many times, but when I was living in the Peace Corps in West Africa, the only thing I had was a boombox, like a cassette player. And I met some folks traveling through from South Africa back to England. They stayed with me for a couple of days before they crossed the desert. I was right on the edge of the Sahara, right in the Sahel. And they gave me all their tapes, so I had all this music, and it was so great. And I had kind of an open house. People would travel through, and so this French guy was traveling. I just had the key hidden, and he met some local guys, invited them back, and just showed them where the key was. And lo and behold, my music was stolen. And one of these guys came back to my house and offered to sell my stuff back to me. I was so livid. I actually was like blind rage. And I started swearing at this guy. And it was in a French country. I started swearing at him in French. Just so, so angry. And in the midst of this tirade of just tearing this guy apart, I had this thought, you're speaking the best French you've ever spoken in your life. And I was so shocked by that thought, it just completely cracked open the whole everything I was feeling, and I actually started laughing, which really confused the guy. That space between reactivity and responding, huge. So deconstructing beliefs, deconstructing strong emotions, it's not about controlling what arises. It's about how you meet it, how you see it. That space between sensation and story is pregnant with possibility. And we cultivate that space through non-judging awareness, through inquiry, and through presence. And we can absolutely train ourselves to rest in that space of non-judging awareness. It's that space where your power lives. It's that space where possibility arises. So, in summary, sensations arise by themselves. Stories follow sensations. If you think if a story over and over and over again, it hardens into a belief. But in all of this, in sensations, stories, and beliefs, the space in between, that's where the freedom waits. So it's a very interesting thing. Is it possible in your life to think of sensation simply as information? Let's take a few moments before we close. If you like, you might feel the breath. And notice again kind of the extrinsic world, the sounds around you, the air touching your skin. And let your attention, if just for a few moments, touch into the intrinsic, to this inner world of aliveness, of sensation. And feel the breath. Notice what naturally arises. And sense, if you can, the pure experience of sensation as information, not a story, just pure sensation. And you might notice how your mind will very quickly move into creating a story or a narrative or a commentary. And you might sense of just for a moment of how that commentary can harden into beliefs. And how, when you bring yourself back to this moment, to this breath, in that space between stimulus and response, sensing that space and the possibility of freedom, possibility of choice. If you'd like, you can deepen your breath. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope you found this helpful. This is all about finding freedom where freedom did not exist before, opening up to this field of infinite possibility. Take good care. Happy trails.